Russian President Vladimir Putin praises China's plan for peace in Ukraine, but Kyiv says it falls short of its demands.
NATO's Secretary-General says it welcomes China's peace initiative, but Ukraine must have the final say.
As protests continue across France, President Macron is due to give a live TV interview about the social unrest over his government's pension reform.
At least 13 people have been killed and hundreds injured after a magnitude 6.5 earthquake hits large swathes of Afghanistan and Pakistan.
1 in 4 people around the world can't access clean drinking water, something the UN wishes to address as it marks World Water Day. Beijing's 12-point peace plan to end the war in Ukraine has been described as falling short on details by Ukraine and its allies. The plan, a topic of discussion between Presidents Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin at their summit in Moscow, doesn't require Russia to withdraw its troops, a basic requisite made by Kyiv. In Washington, the White House response was clear.
So now if China wants to play a constructive role here in this conflict, then they ought to press Russia to pull its troops out of Ukraine and Ukrainian sovereign territory. They should urge President Putin to cease bombing cities, hospitals, and schools, to stop the war crimes and the atrocities, and end the war today. It could happen right now.
The state visit by Xi to Moscow coincided with Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's surprise visit to Kyiv, making him the first leader of Japan to visit a country in conflict since World War II. During their press briefing, President Volodymyr Zelensky said he's invited China for talks on Ukraine.
Китаю ми і публічно, і дипломатичними каналами передали нашу формулу миру і запрошення брати участь в цій формулі. Запрошуємо на діалог, очікуємо відповідь.
China has sought to portray itself as a neutral party in the Ukraine conflict, but so far there is no indication of an equivalent trip to Kyiv by President Xi Jinping.
NATO says it welcomes all peace initiatives, but Ukraine must have the final say. As leaders of China and Russia meet in Moscow for talks on Tuesday, NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg asks Beijing not to support Moscow's war in Ukraine.
Before the upcoming China's peace proposal includes some positive aspects and elements which I support. For instance, the importance of nuclear safety, of protection of civilians, and not least underline the importance of sovereignty, territorial integrity and independence. And of course any peace solution for Ukraine must be based on these principles.
NATO says there's no proof that China is delivering lethal weapons to Russia. But Stoltenberg warns Beijing anyway against supplying them to the Kremlin. He also notes that the two countries are getting closer and closer.
The meeting that takes place in Moscow is part of a pattern we have seen over the last years, where China and Russia are coming closer and closer. We have to remember that just a couple of weeks, or a few weeks before the invasion last February, President Xi and President Putin met in Beijing, where they signed a joint declaration promising each other a partnership without any limits.
As part of NATO's annual report, the Secretary-General pointed out that defence spending among alliance members increased by 2.2% last year. He also confirmed that Finland's membership process should be over before the alliance's summit in July, but Sweden will likely have to wait until after the Turkish elections.
After the EU's announcement of collective ammunition purchases for Ukraine, a setback for the country's war effort. Bulgaria has said it will not be part of the joint programme, nor will it supply fighter jets or tanks. The Bulgarian president said no such support could be given under the current caretaker government.
Bulgaria не подкрепя и не е част от общата поръчка за доставка на снаряди за Украина. България ще подкрепи европейски дипломатически усилия за възстановяване на мира. И докато управлява служебното правителство, България няма да предостави на Украина своите изтребители, нито своите зенитно-ракетни комплекси, нито танкове и бронетранспортери.
The Ukrainian leadership has, however, received a diplomatic boost from a powerful Western ally. Visiting Ukraine, Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida reiterated Tokyo's support for Kyiv. Because of its pacifist constitution, Japan has not supplied offensive weapons, but Kishida's trip indicates Ukraine may receive further financial and other aid.
Another night of disturbances on the sidelines of a rally against the French government's plan to reform the pension system. A new law which includes a rise in the retirement age to 64 was adopted on Monday evening through Article 49 of the Constitution without a vote of MPs and after 2 rejected motions of no confidence in the government. French President Emmanuel Macron has been keeping a low profile for the last few days, but has told allies he has no intention of dissolving Parliament, reshuffling the government or calling a referendum on pension reform to calm tensions. He will also stand by his beleaguered Prime Minister. Macron is due to resurface today, according to the Élysée Palace, to give a live televised interview about the social and political tensions over the pension reform. But anger over the government's decision to invoke a notorious constitutional power to force the reform through the National Assembly without a vote last week has dismayed many ruling party MPs. A further day of protests and strikes is set for Thursday.
Britain's former Prime Minister Boris Johnson has admitted that he misled Parliament by telling MPs that parties at his Downing Street office did not break COVID lockdown rules. But in written evidence to a parliamentary committee, he insisted that he acted in good faith. Johnson was fined by police for breaking the COVID rules that his own government set. In his statement, the former Prime Minister said, "I did not intentionally or recklessly mislead the House on the 1st of December 2021, the 8th of December or on any other date. I would never have dreamed of doing so." Johnson will appear in person before the committee on Wednesday. If it finds that he deliberately lied to the House of Commons, he could be suspended and ultimately face a by-election in his constituency in which he holds a slim majority of just over 7,000. Johnson was forced out as Prime Minister after the latest in a series of scandals last July.
At least 13 people have been killed and hundreds injured after a magnitude 6.5 earthquake shook huge swathes of Afghanistan and Pakistan on Tuesday evening, leading residents of Kabul to spend the night out in the streets in fear of going back indoors. In Islamabad, video footage shows scores of people fleeing offices and shopping centres when the quake struck.
بسیار زلزله شدید شد و همگی بیرون برآمد و همگی ترس و وحشت و همگی از این میترسید که زلزله‌ای که در ترکیه شده بود گویا در کابل نشه. اگر مردم بسیار وحشت زده شده بود و بسیار ترسیده بود.
وقت خبر د خیمو سره خیمه ز په کور کې لرم د ضرورت په اساس په خپل کور کې یوشې دي چې کله په میله باندې زو د پکنیک لپاره د مرګورو سره نو هغه خیمه الحمدلله د اوس په کار رااله دي یو فامیل مخبل دي او دوه فامیل چې دي هم سایګان مې دي دوه فامیلونو الحمدلله په راحت کې دي.
The earthquake comes nearly 2 months after the devastating 7.8 magnitude quake struck southeastern Turkey and northern Syria, killing around 51,000 people. Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis has called a general election for May, 2 months before his Conservative government's mandate ends in July. The country has seen a series of angry mass protests following its worst ever rail disaster last month, which killed 57 people. Protesters accuse successive governments of failing to address safety issues, a legacy of the nation's decade-long financial crisis, which ended in 2018. Now Mitsotakis may pay the price as his party slips in the opinion polls.
The Israeli parliament, or Knesset, has voted to repeal a 2005 law that saw 4 Jewish settlements in the occupied West Bank dismantled at the same time as Israeli troops withdrew from the Gaza Strip. The move could pave the way for an official Israeli return to the abandoned West Bank area. It amounts to a reversal of restrictions on Israeli settler expansion. The vote has been condemned by the US and several other countries as incendiary, coming at a time of heightened tensions.
It is a daily struggle for residents of Venezuela's capital, Caracas. Dozens of people wait to fill jugs of water from the stream flowing from the Repano Hill, where they tap water from broken pipes.
Venimos a buscar agua aquí cada 2 semanas para tomar. Y para la casa casi cada diario tengo que llevar porque nos llega a veces una vez a la semana y por 2 horas.
The UN reports that 2 billion people worldwide, or a quarter of the global population, don't have access to safe drinking water. Something the United Nations wants to draw attention to as it marks World Water Day.
10% of the global population currently lives in areas that are high or critical water stress. In our report, we said that up to 3.5 billion people live under conditions of water stress at least 1 month a year.
In developing countries, many problems related to drinking water are linked to rapid population growth and a lack of sanitary controls. And that puts people's health at risk.
C'est pas facile, nos enfants, d'autres même souvent ils ont des infections même au niveau même du ventre. Même j'ai une sœur même enceinte même qui est à la maison là, tout dernièrement actuellement elle est enceinte, elle a eu une infection chronique.
Additionally, 1.4 million people die each year from diseases caused by water shortages or poor sanitation and hygiene.